Hi, this is Rehmke, and welcome to Exploring the Energy Race. U.S. energy policies and programs, I'm going to make the case, distort the search for cleaner, more reliable, more affordable energy. And we should look at ways to reform and improve the status quo. This is a presentation for First Look 2023. I highlight on my economic thinking webpage, you can click the energy category or search for energy, and there's a number of videos, a number of posts, but videos I recommend. This one, Poverty is Energy Poverty is Valuable, and then one from isit.org on energy options, recommended. Okay. So I do workshops, full day or 3 to 5 hour workshops on the economics of energy policy designed for students researching and debating this topic. And again, the energy race. The theme of this is we've got a race. We don't know which source of energy is best, which transmission is best. We want voluntary cooperation. We want innovation. We want people to have the freedom to choose the energy sources that they prefer. We're referencing articles from Master Resource Blog, Blue Energy Nation, and other research organizations. Now, we've got a broad history here. You know, you might think of this for a family. Where does a family get its energy? Where do you get your energy? Well, food for labor. So people generated energy from eating plants and animals. And then we got horsepower and oxen power from agriculture, from food that was fed to animals. And then over time, in the 1800s, we began to get more power from coal. Of course, we had hydropower during all this time in medieval times and up through the 15th, 16th, 17th century. Dams were powering grinding for grain and so on and so forth. But then more and more use of coal for steam power. Then in the 1920s or late 1800s, we begin to get more and more coal for electricity. And electricity becomes a dominant force in the economy for many years. Then later we get oil. In the late 1900s, oil becomes more and more used as an energy source. For power consumption, we have natural gas, nuclear, and biofuels. So just looking at the change of time, and really this would be the same model for a stunning economic progress and prosperity in the world. People got wealthier because they had access to energy, because there was more energy for powering factories, for transportation, and for heating. Similarly, when you look through energy history for the share of primary energy consumption, again, it's 1800s, it's food and fodder and wood. You heat your house with wood. Coal was big even at 1800, but gets much larger as coal and steam and the Industrial Revolution takes hold. Oil breaks onto the scene in the 1900s, becomes a huge factor, and then natural gas, and then water, wind, solar, nuclear. And these are from Uncharted Territories, a helpful blog site that has had a number of posts on energy. Similarly, the decline in use of wood as a share of energy sources for domestic and industrial heating. So people use wood to heat their house, then coal, then oil, natural gas, and electricity. Here in the Pacific Northwest, partly because of restrictions on natural gas in new homes, people are putting wood stoves in their home and heating themselves that way. So energy, what is it? What do we use it for? Energy for mowing the lawn? Well, lawnmowers can be powered by teenagers, or by gasoline, or by electricity or battery. Maybe solar power. You could charge your lawnmower's battery with solar. Maybe you could put a sail on it and sail it across the lawn on a windy day, or you could build a steam-powered lawnmower. There's lots of options for how you mow your lawn. You know, the mechanical lawnmowers, you just use more energy. You just push harder, so it's muscle power. So that's, powered by the food you eat. There's sitting lawnmowers that use a lot more energy. People don't even have to walk. But who's going to tell us what's lawnmowing best? Well, lawnmower is best. Well, the Department of Energy would be happy to. They have, for commercial lawn equipment, a whole document proposing compressed natural gas, biodiesel, electricity, propane, and incentive programs and more on this. But the goal here we've got the department in the Department of Energy, the Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy Department, spending time trying to get people to use alternative energy for lawnmowers. And I guess if you're in the natural gas industry, compressed natural gas is your preference. So in all this, if you're thinking about the big picture on the topic, looking at energy, where federal regulations hit the energy cycle, first there's energy production. So there's exploration, extraction, processing. The federal government is restricting exploration, extraction of energy on federal lands, which are half of the lands west of the Mississippi, the western states and Alaska. So you could say, look, the federal government should allow more energy exploration and extraction on lands that it owns or has authority for. Similarly, offshore. Offshore, the government is promoting wind power, but they're trying to restrict oil and gas exploration. So you could say we should change those federal policies that have to do with energy production. Then there's energy transportation, trucking, shipping, rail, pipeline, transmission. There are lots of federal policies, NEPA and others, that restrict pipelines, that restrict rail use, that restrict shipping. That would be Jones Act and so forth, restrict building of new power lines. So you could argue we should reduce regulation or change regulation or shift subsidies. We currently have huge subsidies for transmission of wind and solar from like West Texas, paying for the new transmission to bring that wind to other parts of Texas. But you have a whole range of issues having to do with energy transport, and you could look where the federal government's involved there and what could be changed. And then you have energy use. At the end use, where we use the energy, the federal government is encouraging us on whether to have electric cars or gas cars. Right now, they're promoting putting billions, tens of billions of dollars in promoting gas cars and new battery factories and so forth, electrifying the economy. Similarly, in heating, they want to have electric heat and heat pumps instead of natural gas and other fossil fuels. Then there's the energy use in a car. What can you use to power it? Well, gasoline or diesel, but the renewable portfolio or renewable fuels portfolio is calling for biofuels and ethanol. Then there's a whole separate area of energy efficiency where the government's trying to tell us, federal government's trying to tell us how efficient our appliances should be. This is the Energy Star system. Criticism of that, here's a criticism that comes from Wikipedia, or a quoting a critic. Critics have pointed out even if there's new appliance is energy efficient, first off, it could be more expensive. Second, like the washing machine we had, it took an hour and a half to do a washing because it went really slow and used very little water. So trade-offs there. Critics say they have to be replaced more often, and we had to replace that washer that was slow. The new one we got was faster, so that was good. And so if your Energy Star things promote energy efficiency at the cost of appliances that last a long time, you're contributing to landfills and waste of natural resources. So there's, even on this policy where the government says, hey, this is good because we're saving you, $30,000, $40,000 a year on electricity costs, there's other costs involved too. And of course, there's concerns about the whole program because it may or may not, appliances may or may not do what they're supposed to do. Here's a Competitive Enterprise Institute has opposed a special briefing series defending the personal energy choices of America. How about letting people make choices of what kind of energy they use in their car, in their home, what kind of appliances they buy? Maybe the federal government should sunset all these programs should be ended, sunsetted, and let's save money and let people make choices. Let's use persuasion. In Department of Energy news, here's news from 10 or 15 days ago. The Department of Energy unveils a new interactive map showcasing clean energy investments. So, huge range of clean energy investments that the federal government is investing in companies and research projects around the country to bring new clean energy online. So this is what the Department of Energy is doing in the status quo. You can see, more of those there. But in the field of development economics, like for the developing world or for new energy, you have sort of a discussion of the planners and the searchers. So right now we have central planners at the Department of Energy saying, we think these programs are worth pursuing, this research or this technology. We don't think that one is. So tax dollars are being deployed to energy projects that people at the DOE think are a good idea, that congressmen think are a good idea, or people in the administration. They're making decisions based on their knowledge and incentives, but that tends to be a top-down problem. These federal funds are often politicized. They go to people, projects where there's a congressman on the committee for that area that wants jobs for his university or his research center or company. Plus, if you look at the announcement that's on this page, it's all about creating union jobs. All these things have to be union jobs, apparently. Well, the challenge there is only 7% of the U.S. workforce outside of government is unionized. That is the manufacturing workforce. So then you've got to draw from this small, percentage. And of course, the goal is to promote more unionization. But just like the Foxconn plant they're trying to build in Arizona, they can't because they don't have workers, and they can't bring the workers from Taiwan that know how to operate the machinery. So you have a lot of challenges here with top-down funding. And the argument is you should let projects be funded by the private sector, by entrepreneurs, by enterprises, and let them sort out which are successful and which aren't. We've seen this picture before of top-down funding of clean energy projects, and that was the Solandra enterprise some years ago. And this was a solar panel plant that the Obama administration was pouring huge amounts of money in because they thought they could create a lot of jobs, help get the economy going again, and build solar panels. Instead, the whole thing went belly up, lost a huge amount of money. At least the factory got reused for Tesla. But again, what's going to make these new Department of Energy grants any different than the disasters they've had in the past? And I think the electric bus company just blew up, literally and figuratively, recently, that the federal government was promoting. So that's another sort of scandal in the top-down electrification of new technologies. So switching gears a bit to energy policies. This is an article from the Empowerment Alliance recently in their afternoon tea. And it's arguing that pipelines are the arteries of our energy system. The largest network of pipelines, 2.6 million miles of pipelines stretch across the country. They're the safest means. So anything you do that restricts pipelines, say we want to make this pipeline cleaner or new environmental impact statement, what that does is shift more oil and gas to be shipped by truck and by train, which, are safe, relatively safe, but not as safe as pipelines. Same with coal. Pipelines deliver, 680 billion gallons of energy products annually. And the U.S. gas network connects 68 million households, 5 million companies. So we've got this huge network of pipelines. Currently, federal policy is to restrict this. And this has gone back and forth recently, so I would argue this is something for students to consider. Here's a network of pipelines. The green are the interstate pipelines. The red are the intrastate. So the red ones are within a state, and the state can regulate those pipelines, but the green ones go across states, so that involves federal regulations. And in the article, continuing the article, says the Biden administration's Environmental Protection Agency recently rolled back what the authors say were common sense regulations that allow environmental groups and local entities to politicize the process, that is, file complaints and complaints. And you could argue, we want to make sure these pipelines are safe, but how many environmental reviews and how much litigation improves safety and how much just delays and raises the cost of energy and slows the process of building pipelines, which again puts more oil and gas in trucks and rail, which is more dangerous, more polluting, less environmentally safe. And this has a lot to do with NEPA, which is an environmental regulation. Here's the Competitive Enterprise Institute advises the Council on Environmental Quality to withdraw its NEPA guidance on greenhouse gas emissions. And this is from earlier this year in March. The idea here is, instead of just looking at the safety of new highways or pipelines, that now they're saying, well, we need to also look at greenhouse gas emissions and climate change. Well, so anything that would send natural gas or oil from one place to another, the argument, do you have to count in all the CO2 emissions that would come out of that? But of course, they're going to just get sent another direction by a train or a truck, and that has CO2 emissions as well, in fact, more. But here's an article. NEPA started in 1970, was, to look at environmental agencies, environmental impacts of actions. But now the guidance, it encourages projects to cut greenhouse gas emissions from the Paris Accord, which was unilaterally done by the executive branch and then repealed by the Trump administration, then put back in Biden, and who knows what will happen next time. But the idea, they're saying that all our highways and infrastructure projects should be considered in light of cutting emissions in half by 2020 and ending them by 2050, carbon dioxide emissions. Well, that's a heavy burden, never voted on by Congress, never approved by the public, but it's the status quo now. And then here's more on this. Now, interesting about this, permitting reforms. Finally, this is a more recent article from June, looking at the positive side, again, from the Competitive Enterprise Institute, which is a free market organization. Well, here's another one on NEPA permitting from the a very progressive, more leftist organization, the Council on American Progress, I think. NEPA permitting crucial to renewable infrastructure projects. So one benefit of promoting this reform is you don't have to take sides on whether natural gas or windmills and new electric infrastructure is going to be built. You're saying things should be safe, but it shouldn't be excruciatingly expensive and delayed just for the sake of delaying it. So you can come at that from many sides. Now, I want to spend just a couple minutes on the case for more wind and solar, particularly solar. This is a chart, it's a little hard to see here from Our World in Data, but this red line is the huge decline, some 90% decline over 10 years to 2009 to 2019 in the cost of producing solar panels or the energy from solar panels. So a lot of energy sources went down in price as new technology, new efficiency, new advances. But a number of people are saying, wait a minute, solar is really, really cheap now because the technology, the solar panels are being able to convert more solar energy to electricity. They're lighter, they're less expensive, they last longer than they used to, the claim is. So we've had a big drop in onshore wind production, not offshore, a big drop in solar voltaic production. So now also natural gas is cheaper, and you can see its prices are right down next to wind and solar, even in this chart. So lots of energy choices. That's the gas combined cycle. Gas peaker is up above. But what they're saying is, given that solar is so cheap, we should promote that. This author, Noah Smith, says our climate change debates are out of date. He's saying people used to debate whether we should have fossil fuels or solar, but he says now he thinks solar has won the game because they've lowered prices so dramatically. So one of the challenges debaters have on this topic is your judges, you don't know the ideology. You don't know if your judge is a Republican or Democrat, but it turns out that matters. You've got a 50-50 split. If the topic were, look, should we have more economic growth or more environmental protection, the audience is sort of 50-50 or a little more for climate than economy, with some undecided, so you don't know where your judge is coming from necessarily. But Democrats, some 80% saying we should focus on the climate emergency or environmental issues, and only 14%, 18% for economic growth. Of course, part of this you could argue that Democrats tend to be wealthier than Republicans, but that's, again, something for further research. Republicans, though, are saying 72% are in favor of policies that lead to economic growth and only 23% for environmental protection. So, if your judge is wearing a Republican or a Democrat button or sticker, that gives you an idea. And independents, again, are 50-50. But that's just part of the reality on climate change debates. And this is partly because people are hearing different news feeds about whether wind works or whether solar works or whether fossil fuels are heavily polluting or not. Again, more on this. He's saying our climate views, debates are out of date, and he's saying we've got a tremendous amount of new electric generating capacity being built. 2022, we've got new windmills, lots of wind and solar capacity. One thing for debaters to remember on this is that electric generating capacity is not the same as the actual electricity generated. An oil or natural gas or coal plant can generate at its capacity. A nuclear plant does too. What's it rated at? It's almost always up. It's almost always online. However, wind and solar only work, solar during the day and wind when it's windy. And people can project what they are expected to produce, the rated capacity, but the actual capacity is far smaller. And you can do the data and find out this on the real world. And the other big issue is you can produce from natural gas, like a natural gas peaker, that runs at the peak time when you need energy. It's reliable. It can generate whenever it needs to. You can't rely on wind. So if your system is set up to use a huge amount of wind power, you have to be ready in case that wind power declines unexpectedly. You have to be able to ramp up more power from nuclear, from solar if it's during the day, or from natural gas or other sources. So the real capacity for wind and solar is smaller, number one. Number two, their costs aren't realistic unless it includes the cost of the backup power that's needed to make those energy sources reliable. And that's not saying they're terrible or can't be used. It just says we need to compare apples to apples in terms of providing reliable energy. And status quo doesn't do that. You could argue that should be changed. So the other challenge with wind and solar that I emphasize is that even if you're a fan of wind and solar and battery power for cars, which are the best? We have ecosystems where, we don't know which wind turbines are best. There's different sizes, there's different places they put them, they close or far away, and there's different designs. This is a windmill that is a vertical tower that sort of shakes, and they argue that that's less noisy, less intrusive, more appealing, and generates wind power. Should we have more of those instead of the status quo? Who are we going to rely on to make the decisions about which wind powers are best? I have this other image that's hard to see. There's a whole bunch of different wind. There's one that sticks on buildings. It's silent and doesn't move, but it says it's even better for generating power. So a lot of this, and also offshore wind, it's incredibly expensive to have those connected to the ground underneath the ocean, but there's floating wind farms that seem to work far better. There's kites that fly in the air that generate wind. So we want to, even in the wind and solar fields, you want a searching process where you're incentivizing entrepreneurs and enterprises to develop new and better wind sources. And that's not likely to happen with top-down programs and federal and state grants that are only for the current ones that have received funding. So we want a system that's flexible and innovative and responds to advancing technology. It's an energy race. All these different energy sources are moving ahead, getting better, getting cleaner, and which are the best or will be the best in 5 years. This looks at our primary energy consumption by source: petroleum, natural gas, and I break out nuclear here. This is 2021. You can, or break out renewable, how much from geothermal, solar, hydroelectric. So even if you're promoting more renewable, which is best? Many advocates say we should have much more geothermal. We have much better technology from the fracking industry to build pipes underground, to reach far more heat and generate steady geothermal. So there's a dozen different companies investing in geothermal that claim their technology is best. Solar, again, is getting better and better, particularly solar that goes on the roof or above a parking lot where, the house is cooled as the sun is decreased. But of course, solar works in those states where they've got a lot of sun, not so well in states that, have shorter days in the winter and more clouds. Hydroelectric, lots of criticism on hydroelectric, even though it's a major reliable source. There's a big push for in-stream hydro, which is interesting. Also, remember, hydroelectric is not just producing energy. It's reducing flooding. It's controlling for floods. In California, the dams absorb a huge amount of water, rain like last year, that prevented flooding or reduced flooding. And then you can draw down that over the many years where you don't get enough rain during drought time that California has. Also for recreation, all across the country are tremendous recreation areas behind dams that are also providing energy. So when you look at proposals for more hydro, the benefits: flood control, balancing floods and droughts, and recreation. The downside: fisheries getting in the way. They're taking down some private dams on the river, the Trinity River, heading north out of California to allow salmon to flourish. So salmon runs have to get around dams. How do you design dams that don't restrict salmon as much? And then there's biomass, biofuels, and wood. That's a significant part of the renewables. We have federal programs that fund biofuels and wood fuels, that the wood pellet thing, and those are pretty much an environmental disaster and costly. Not a disaster, but costly environmentally. And though they benefit special interests, those could be ended and the world would be a better place, I would argue. So we've got a history of federal energy policies that's relevant. And then we've got energy economics and foreign policy. There's a broader question: why do we even have federal energy policies? And that actually goes back to the Arab-Israeli war and the great gas crisis, when the Saudis stopped and Iran stopped selling oil to the U.S., and we had gas lines and a big mess. So that leads to the federal government getting into the saving energy business with 55-mile-an-hour speed limit. But you could argue that that in many ways was not helpful, or at least isn't relevant now, but the policy still exists. Okay, I'm going to stop now with this chart, and this is, you can find this online, but this is U.S. energy consumption by source and sector. So you can see on the left where the energy comes from petroleum, from natural gas, from renewable energies, coal and nuclear, and then you can see where it goes. Obviously petroleum oil is turned into gas, and that's a big part for transportation, for gasoline and diesel fuel. A lot of that also goes for industry, for different energy uses there in factories. And then a lot of the energy also goes from these different sources down to the electric power sector. And what's interesting about this, as we electrify the economy, if you look at that, the amount of total electricity created with all this raw material, petroleum, natural gas, renewables, it looks like from this chart that 23 Well, 65% of it is lost. That is lost through friction and maybe birds getting electrocuted on the power line and other sorts of things. So a lot of electricity is produced by fossil fuels, but lost in the process. So when you look at petroleum making gasoline, how much of that petroleum is lost in the process of making gasoline for cars versus how much is lost in the process of making electricity, which is then has to be transmitted, and by the time it gets to the electric car station, how much is left from the original electricity. So you've got a lot of efficiency issues to look at because electric power lines, they don't transmit at the end all the power they started with. Okay, thank you for listening. For those who listened this long, and hope to have more later. Thanks.